Um, all right. Could you spotlight um my camera, please? I'm not seeing it. Maybe I need to do that. Sorry, guys. I'm a little rusty. Okay. Hopefully everybody can see me filling the screen. If not, I'm sure they will do that in just a second. Hello, my name is Lindsay Wyrick. You probably know that if you've signed up for this class. I want to thank you so much for joining me this afternoon or morning, depending on where you are. And we are going to get right into our demonstration. I am painting on a watercolor greeting card today because I thought this scene would make a really nice Father's Day card for your dad, your husband, or you can even stack it away for any sort of birthday card or occasion that you want. It's a beautiful seascape, and the techniques are going to be so fun and easy that I hope you end up painting a bunch more. If you don't want to work on a watercolor greeting card, it would also be excellent in a sketchbook. So I'm going to switch to the overhead view of my camera, and we're going to get started. All right, so the first thing you're going to want to do is take a ruler or a straight edge and draw a horizon line about 2.5 inches down from the top of your paper. I have taped down my paper on all four sides, and that's going to give me a nice clean border when I remove the tape, and that just gives you a really beautiful frame. You don't have to do that. You could clip your paper down or clip the edges of your sketchbook so your paper doesn't wiggle around too much. But I do like to do that just to give it that nice little visual frame. I'm going to start by wetting my paper, and you can use whatever brush you like for this. I like to use a flat brush. This is a pretty big one. You don't need to use one so large. Before I do that though, I'm just going to run the back of my fingernail down over the tape to just make sure I've got a nice seal there so that the paint doesn't go underneath and ruin my nice edge. And I'm just going to wet down to that line that we drew. Now, keep in mind, there will be a recording of this available on Monday. So if this goes a little fast, or maybe you just want to visit with your friends in the chat and watch it through once, you can always do that and then catch the replay later. And I do produce time lapses of these projects that we do here on the Michael's Derwent live streams, so that if you want to prepare for any of them, you can always do that prior to or even after the live stream if you want. So what I like to do is look for a certain like glossiness to my paper. And if I tip it to the light, I can see that it's shiny everywhere. And that tells me that I've got water everywhere. Now, there's a couple different ways to do the clouds. I can either blot some off with a paper towel. I just keep my paper towel handy there, or I can just kind of paint around them. And you can do whatever's best for you. Now, in the Derwent line and wash set, we have a variety of different products. We have some Derwent ink tints, and those are the really saturated bright colors. And we've got a red, yellow, and blue of those colors. So you can mix up pretty much whatever you like. And then we've got some Graphitint paints, and like this ocean blue color here is really nice because it's a little bit more muted. So I'm going to mix that a little bit in with my blue for the sky. Now, when you have wet paper, it is going to dry a little bit lighter. So if you see this looks kind of dark compared to that, it's going to dry a little bit lighter. So just kind of keep that in mind. The wetter your paper and paint is, the more it's going to shift as it dries. Now, I'm going to do a paper towel lifting method here just because I think it works pretty well and it's pretty easy. And I like to have my sky darker towards the top of the paper and lighter as it gets down to the horizon line. And I'm simply going to take my paper towel and I'm just going to blot off a few clouds. Now you have to be quick because once that ink tints product has dried, it's permanent on your paper. You can layer over it, which makes it really nice for a lot of mixed media techniques. But if you wait too long to lift up your clouds, you're not going to be able to. And generally, if I'm doing clouds, I would make ones up higher, larger, and then tinier as they get towards the horizon. But we don't have that much room to work here, so I'm just going to kind of keep it pretty easy like that. I like to tuck my paper towel under my palette so I can just dab my brush if I need to. So now we're going to work on our water, but see how I have hard edges there? I want to work on dry paper because if I wet this water area and I go to paint in my blue, it's going to seep into all of these areas that I want to remain white. So I'm going to start with the colors that I used on the sky, the ocean and the bright blue, because your sky is going to be reflected in the water, and then you've got some of the colors of the water itself. I'm going to add in a little bit of the meadow graphitant. Now, graphitant is a product that's got pigment similar to what the Inktense is, but it also has graphite. And that can give you a beautiful texture, a beautiful granulation, and it's just kind of a nice variety. It's nice to have the variety in these. Okay, and I am going to, maybe I'll take my pencil just to give myself a little bit of a guideline about how large I want the water. I'm just going to draw my little sand dunes just like that, just like a little bit of a curling line there. And you've got to be careful as you're working up towards this wet area, but I do want my darkest color up here. So I'm going to just try to leave a little bit of a gap between where my sky is, just a little airspace so that I don't end up having the color bleed into the sky too much. And when I apply my paint, I'm going to keep my brush, my flat brush, at a parallel to the horizon angle, if that makes sense. And I'm just going to leave some white. I'm going to let some little white caps show through. I won't even necessarily have it exactly the same as my demo. I start with leaving a lot of white space, and then I'm going to add a little water here, get it a little bit lighter towards the shore. I start with leaving a lot of white space, and then I'll go back in and kind of whittle it down as needed. But like I said, with the Inktense products, once you've added water and it's on the paper, it's going to be really hard to lighten it up. So I'd rather have more white in there to start off with. I'm going to take some of this artichoke, and this is from the pastel collection of Derwent pan paints. Oh, so if you already have, like, you've got the Inktense pan paints and you've got the graphitant pan paints and the pastel pan paints, you don't need this set because you already have all of those products. So I just want to mention that too, because this is a nice sampler and it's a convenient way to have these products. But if you already have them in another iteration and maybe you only paint at home, so you don't need a travel palette, then you've got everything you need right there. And as always, you can use what you have and decide whether it's something that's going to be valuable to add to your stash. All right, I'm going to add a little bit of water to that. And I just want to tint some of these white caps with a little bit of that greenish color, just to bring in a little variety. All right, next up, we are going to put in these sand dunes. So we just need to mix kind of a sandy color. I'm going to clean off this big area there because I want to use that larger space for mixing. And I'm going to start off, and when I'm mixing colors, what I like to do is say, okay, what color out of my palette looks the closest to what I'm after? So these are my actual swatches. I think it's really important to swatch your paints and not to just go by what the little swatch that comes with it has. So I would look at this and say, okay, what color is the closest to that? That's what I'm aiming for. So I'm thinking that this autumn brown here is probably the closest color. So I'm going to start with that one, and I'm going to mix up, make a puddle of it. But that autumn brown is actually pretty red. So I want to mute that down a little bit. I'm going to take some of that mango yellow. Now, I didn't pre-spray my paints. You certainly can if you want to. Now that's looking real orange, so I want to negate the orange. So to do that, I want to go to something that's opposite. So the opposite of orange is blue. So I could go with that blue or that blue. I think I'm going to do that one because I think that blue is so saturated, I might end up with green. So I'm going to go into this ocean blue. And see, we're getting this kind of a muted color there. Getting close. I think I'll add in maybe some of this gray to desaturate it a bit. And I think I'll add in a little bit of natural brown. All right, I like that pretty well. I feel like I still need a little bit more of a yellowy tone to it. Maybe I'll take some of this into another mixing area and add a little of the sun yellow to it, because that's I think that might be a little bit weaker. And I'm going to add some of this because that's too yellow. I want it kind of purpley, so I'm going to add this port, which is kind of a purple color, and tone it down that way a little bit. Okay, so I got a couple different tones here. I think those are going to work fine. I'm going to go back in with my large brush. Of course, you can use whatever brush. It doesn't have to be a flat. I'm going to start off with this lighter color. And by just the time that it took us to mix, things will have dried. So I'm just going to go ahead and paint right up to the water. Now I'm going to dip into that other color that we have here. Fill in a bit. I'm going to put some more of that autumn brown in there because that's got a kind of a pink tone to it. And I'm noticing I did have a lot more of that in my original, and I like that. And so at this stage, I'm just kind of filling in with a sandy base color. I haven't really added any detail. I just want to get these kind of lighter tones everywhere on my paper. Now, if anybody has any questions, please pop them in the chat. I'm going to dry this really quickly with my heat tool, and I will answer any questions that have arisen so far. Gina, has any questions come through yet that you can see?
No questions. I was just explaining to somebody, they asked if they could use watercolors, and I explained that you did for the sky, but not the water, due to the not wanting to run together because of the distinct differences there. But other than that, no questions.
Oh, if somebody wanted to use watercolors, though, there's absolutely no. You can. The techniques will transcribe fine. You'll just have a little bit different of a look. These are all water-based products, water-soluble products, and they will act like watercolors. You'll just have a little bit different of a look. But I always say use what you have, and then if you think a product that I'm showing is going to be a benefit to adding to your stash, then it's great. It's great to know about it and add it if it is useful. Another thing that's kind of fun about the products that Derwent offers, they offer a water soluble graphite block, and you can buy it in a set or just a block of the water soluble graphite, and you could mix that with any of your Inktense colors. You can mix them with your watercolors, so you can get a very similar look. Just adding a few special products to the stuff you already have. So I think that's a really fun way to add to your stash. I'm going to go ahead and add some of these grasses in here, and I'm going to keep those colors there though, because I think I'm going to use them a little bit more. I'm going to start off with meadow. And that's such a pretty color on its own. I think I'll go in and just start with that. Now, one thing I will tell you about the Graphitint pencils is that the Graphitint pan paints is they're very thirsty. So your brush might feel like it wants to drag a bit. So just start off with a really juicy puddle of paint here. That's going to help you get those nice flowing strokes. Now, when I'm moving my brush, I'm moving my whole arm. And the reason I like to do that, and if you can't do it, that's not a huge deal. I'm just going to make this little base of the tuft of grasses here. But by moving my whole arm, I get a much more fluid look. And you're probably thinking, wow, that's really tall. But we're close to these objects on the beach. So by having some of them nice and tall, it gives us a really nice scale. So I'm just using my brush at a 90-degree angle. So if you look at how my brush and my paper are meeting, it's at a 90-degree angle, and I'm just going to flick up from there. And I'm gonna let them taper down and get a little bit shorter as they come away, but I'm still using that 90-degree angle. When you have your brush at a 90-degree angle with your paper, you're gonna have the most control, because if I want a thick stroke, watch this, I can press my brush down like that, and I'm getting the belly of the brush in there, and it's gonna give me a nice thick patch of color. But then if I lift it up to the tip, maybe even give it a little twist, I can get a much finer stroke. So you can get a lot of strokes from a chunky brush like this, which I think, you know, knowing how to do that, you're going to be able to do way more with less. And if you're using a water brush for this, you might want to actually empty it out and dip from a cup of water, because sometimes your water brushes will feed water continuously, and then you'll end up with your paints kind of getting a little too watery. So now I want a darker version of this. So I'm going to take, actually, let's put our other couple little tufts of grass in there too while we're at it first, while we have this color out. I'm just going to stamp down to get the little base. For the shorter grasses, I'll just flick with my wrist. I don't need to do the whole arm movement, but with those longer shapes, it's nice to get the whole arm in there if you can. If you can't, don't sweat it. But if you can, I think it's really handy. And then I'll put another little tuft in here. If it's just a couple little grasses, I won't do the little base part because you wouldn't really have that much shadow or depth, but otherwise I do. And we'll have some coming in from the edge there. All right, so we've kind of identified where we're going to have our groups 1, 2, 3, 4. We should have a fifth group in there to make it have a little bit better balance. We'll do that one over here. Okay. Now I want to mix up a darker version. So I'm going to start with the meadow. And let's see, I think I'll add a little bit of Payne's gray in there. And I'm going to start down here, down the base. I'm just going to drip some in there. Now, because I don't just want to cover up everything I've done, I'm actually going to switch to a smaller brush. I'm going to grab, you can do a small round or a liner, and then flick up some of that. Actually, I think I will stick with that same brush because that one's carrying a lot more. I'll do some details with the liner. And it's totally fine when you're working with a water-based media, a water-soluble media like this. If you don't have brushes that are dedicated to your water-soluble media, your watercolors or whatnot, but you have acrylic paint brushes, you can absolutely use those. They're not going to hurt them. Now, using your watercolor brushes with acrylics could hurt the watercolor brushes, but it's not going to do anything to your acrylic brushes. So don't be afraid if you need to substitute a little bit. All right, now I also want to have a little shadow under here. So I'm going to take some of that natural brown, mix it in with the beach color we've already been using. And I am just going to kind of dip into the bottom there where the paint is still wet, and just kind of drag some of that out. You can pull a little bit of it up into the plant itself, and that will bring some of the dirt and sand color in there. And maybe we'll just take a wet brush, just kind of blot off the extra water on it and drag a little bit of that down. And we're creating a nice little nestled place for that to be. I think actually, before I get too carried away, I do want to throw in some just kind of divots in the sand. I love exercises like this because then you can kind of try different ways, put different amounts of grasses. You can throw some shells, some rocks, and really just have a good time with it. There's no way to mess it up, especially when you're building up like this and you're building kind of slowly. All right, so we're going to go back to our mix. We're going to have to mix some more up though, because we used most of that up. We're going to use our Meadow and our Payne's Gray. It's going to make us this kind of drab olive color. And again, we'll add it to the bottom of our little plant here, and we'll just pull up a few little chunks. Then we can go in with our liner or a smaller round brush. And pull up some extras. Reload when you feel like you need it. And don't be afraid to like get expressive with your strokes. Like get a little scribbly in there. Get some, like we'll have like those wheat. So it's like sea oats where you have it almost looks like a little piece of wheat. You know, you can play around with that. Add some variety. It's a lot of fun too. Learn what your brushes can do, right? This is it's just a piece of paper. It's just a greeting card or a page in the sketchbook. Have fun with it and see what you can create. I think I'll take a little of that Meadow on its own. I still like to, even if I take a color on its own, I still like to mix it on the palette somewhere so it picks up a little bit of something else I've been using. And then that helps keep this harmony in your work, because you end up cross-pollinating the colors. Now, it's pretty easy to keep harmony when you're working with a limited palette like we have here. But if, say, you want to have all the colors and you have all the Inktense and all the Graphitin and all those options, and you have all those palettes in front of you, it can get really confusing. So if you have a central mixing area and you just make sure you pick up some of the other colors you've used as you go, you're going to end up with a lot more variety, but you'll keep picking up into the same colors, so it'll look harmonious rather than looking like you used one of every color you have, and then it's kind of crazy. And do the same thing to these other little tufts of grass. I could probably do all those with just a smaller brush. Clean that brush off and set it aside. So as we get to these smaller little tufts, you don't need to have as much of an anchoring like base, because they wouldn't be casting as much shadow. So I'm just like, in fact, here, I don't even think I'll put much of an anchor because I don't really need it. If your palette stain, which mine do, it doesn't bother me, but if it bothers you, you can use a Mr. Clean magic eraser or any generic magic eraser to get them back to white if that is a concern. I always figure the dirtier, the more stained the palette, the better it works, because then it makes it so your paint doesn't beat up on you anymore. All right. I'm gonna let those dry a bit, and I want to go back into the water. I'm going to go back to my flat brush here. If you want to go with a smaller one, you can, because we are going to be working with less paint, and sometimes working with a smaller brush is a little bit easier to manage the less paint. I'm going to pick up some of the bright blue. I'm going to pick up some of the Payne's Gray, and I'm going to make myself a nice dark blue color, but I'm mixing it into that same area from the water, so I know that I'm going to have those harmonious colors. So this is going to be our darkest values, which are up near the horizon. I'm just going to go right in. If I do need, well, maybe I'll blot a little bit off in case, just to make sure I don't end up with a big blob. I'm holding this at an angle so I can really see where the brush is going to land, and I'm just going to kind of tap in a little bit of darker color here and there. towards the horizon. Okay, I've got a little bend in this brush. I think I'm gonna grab a different one. That brush seems to have a little cupping to it, so I don't wanna mess with it. I'll grab a smaller one actually. I want little choppy strokes because I want it to mimic the feel of the waves in the ocean. And add a little water to that. I'm going to add a little bit of the artichoke in there. That was that more kind of pastel green color that we had used. And I'm just going to add a little bit of that here and there. This color scheme, the color scheme of this painting reminds me a lot of like vintage postcard illustrations. I think it's pretty. And I'll be more looking at my painting and what I think it needs versus looking at my finished painting to my side, because every time you paint something, even if it's something you've painted a bunch of times, you'll change it up a little bit. All right. Next thing I'm going to do is find a scrap of paper. I think I'll use this paper towel. I'm just going to lay that over the water area. I'll just tear it in a couple pieces here. And then I'm going to use a simple toothbrush to do some spattering. You can buy a spattering tool that looks like this. It'll give you some spattering, but I like to just say, just use a toothbrush. And I'm going to grab some of the natural brown. You do need it to be kind of, you take the natural brown in the port. You do need it to be kind of juicy for this. I'd add a little bit of the Payne's gray in there. If you want to practice this on a scrap paper, that would not be a bad idea. But if you get too much on there, you can blot it off really quick with a paper towel. So I'm just going to run my finger across there and add some spattering. Now, the wetter it is, the more, the bigger spats you're going to get. So if I want smaller spats, what I want to do is just kind of blot off the extra moisture. And see, then I get more fine spatter. And if you point the head of the toothbrush down to your paper, you shouldn't get a massive amount of overspray. All right, so I'm going to blot off on top of the little tufts of grass, and any place else I don't want as much texture. And now I'm going to go back to that angle brush. I'm going to take that darker color, and I'm going to just start adding some darker divots in the sand around the grasses right underneath them, and just kind of let them trail out a little bit. Maybe I'll make a little path there going down to the water and that little dip. Okay. The next thing I want to do is I'm going to paint the birds in here. I'm going to paint them with the Stormy Gray, I think it's called, Storm Gray. And then, so I'm going to get the kind of basic shapes in there, but then I'll add detail with my black pen. So the line and wash set comes with the Derwent line makers in a 0.03 and a 0.08. And the thing with any fine liners is that when you go to add them to your paper, you want to make sure your paper is bone dry. And I like to use the line makers last when I'm using the set, because several of the colors in here are opaque. And if I show you this, the swatch here, the Graphitint colors are, they have that graphite in there, which doesn't really make them opaque, but it makes the color reflect, it makes the light reflect off of them. So if I was to line all this in the black line makers first and then paint over it, I would be obscuring a lot of my lines from both the graphite and the pastel colors. So that's why I like to do those lines last. But it's so important that anytime you use a fine liner on your paper, that your paper is bone dry, or I don't know why, but it ruins the pens. If you get them wet with just plain water, it just seems to seal them off and they don't work properly. So save your pens. They'll last you a long time as long as you don't get them wet. If you get them wet, then it's curtains for them. So you don't want to do that. All right, so we're gonna paint.
I have a question for you before you move on. We received this question: what angle was the last wave brush used?
We had the small one was a 1/4 inch angle, and a flat brush would be absolutely fine. You know, it doesn't have to be an angle. If you prefer flat brushes, they'll work just as well. And this other one was a 1/2 inch. So I used a 1/2 and a 1/4.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I have a question as well, Lindsay. They asked how you started with your picture, if you used a template or anything that would be available.
For this one, we just start with a horizon line. But if you go to my, if you did want to, I know I have a picture of this on my, I posted it on my blog today, actually. If you wanted to like right click on that and print it out, if that would help you to just get a few lines, you're more than welcome to. But as long as you get a nice straight line across, then this is just a curvy line. That's the only drawing that we did. It's amazing just having the borders taped down and just practicing your brush strokes, how it all comes together. But you're more than welcome to print off and trace my painting. I don't mind at all if you ever want to do that for any of my paintings. I have no problem with that. I met this woman at my French art retreat, and she had an app on her phone that you would hold your phone over, I think it was called like Da Vinci something. You'd hold your phone over your paper and you'd look down through your phone and it will show you where your hand is and you could draw like projecting it. It was the coolest thing. So that might be a nice option too, if somebody just wants to like open up a photo online and do something like that too. I'm tech challenged, so it's easier for me just to draw it. So I'm going to draw some birds. If the birds seem a little bit much for you and you're not comfortable with doing that, you don't have to. But I think they add a nice amount of life. And I'm going to put 5 birds in here. You could do 3. So I'm going to start with kind of a little stretched out M. Okay. And if you want to leave it at a stretched out M and not do another single thing to that, that is totally fine. But once I've got that M, I'm going to thicken it up a little bit in the center. And if you think of how a bird is built, you know, the wings as it attaches to the body are the widest. And then as they go out to the end of the wings, it's more tapered. I'm just going to give a little bit of a hint at the tail. And then I'm going to give a little bit of a hint at the beak. And that's all I'm doing. We're going to add detail with the pens. And like I said, if you just want to do the M, just do the M and call it a day. Now for this next one, we're going to, I'm just going to do a dot for the head. I'm going to do a little swoop out for one wing. I'm going to do a swoop out with a little bend for the other wing. I'm going to do a little bit of a rectangle for the body and thicken up wing number 1. And then just a little kick out for the tail feathers. And I know it looks really sketchy because we haven't put our pen details in. And to be completely honest, at least once in every painting that I'm adding birds to, I'm pretty sure I've ruined the painting when I put the birds in, but it always works out. Now for this guy, he's pretty fun. He's kind of like gonna dive in and catch himself a tasty fish. So we are gonna make a very steep V. And let's see, I'm going to thicken up the V at the bottom. You need to have your brush wet enough. See how that's broken up? And what I said about some of the pans being kind of thirsty feeling, Just make sure you've got enough water and paint on there so you don't have a broken line. If you get a broken line, it's not a big deal. You just paint over it. But sometimes it's nice to do it in one stroke because then you don't have to worry about having a shake or anything. Now I'm going to throw in the little flicks for the tail, and I'm just going to put a little line out to indicate where the head and the beak would be. And then these two guys here are going to be, we're made in the shade. We've already done the hard ones. This is just a very simple M. Apparently I did not pass kindergarten. And then we're going to do just a steeper V down there. So we've got this little group. We will add pen details to it in a moment. So at this point, I'm going to give this a really nice dry, and then we're going to add some color pencils and some pens. We're going to do a pens last because all these the paints are a little bit opaque. The pencils are very opaque, and the pens are, we want them to land on top. Now, the pens may have a little bit of trouble when you go over the pencil, but we're not going to put a ton of pencil down, so it's not going to be an issue. If you are doing some artwork where you're going to have a significant amount of pencil and then you want to add pens to it, you may run into some trouble with the pens skipping over the waxy pencil. So I just want to say that we're not going to have a trouble with it here, but it could be an issue if you're doing like a lot of color pencil. So if there's any other questions, Gina, that you want, if any have been added while I'm drying, this would be a great time to take some.
The only question so far is asking if the paint is permanent, if they heat set it on fabric.
The Inktense is not the graphitint or the pastel, but like if we're looking at the swatch here, the sun yellow would be, the mango, the poppy red, the bright blue, the Payne's gray, and the natural brown. So if you stuck with those colors, they would be. And if you think you want to do a lot of fabric painting, I think I would probably recommend the Inktense blocks, because you have the option of using them like a pan paint, or you can pick up the stick and actually draw onto your fabric. Like you could dip the stick in water and draw on it. As long as you fully saturate it, it will be permanent on fabric. All right, now we're going to do, and you also want to dry this before you do colored pencil. You won't hurt the pencils if you don't, but if you don't dry this and you go to put pencil on, it's going to flatten the tooth of your paper, and then it's going to be really difficult to have anything stick on top of that because it just makes it too slick. So I'm going to start with the olive earth, and I'm just going to throw in a few more grasses here. I like to have a sharpener handy when I'm using the Derwent Drawing Pencils, because, well, actually any of them, because they have a really thick lead. You can see how thick that is. And they're very soft, so they'll wear down easily. So you might want to sharpen them just to keep that fine point. But you don't have to, because we're going to be using the pens to do a lot of our detail. But this is just going to build up some body and give us a nice, some nice textures and whatnot. I'm going to take some of the brown ochre, and all of these colors can be found in these set of 12. The Derwent, look at that pretty texture that we get. It's like just perfect. It's in between the big spatters and just the flat wash. These are available in sets of 6, 12, and 24. I will say that if you get the set of 12, you probably are going to want the set of 24. So maybe think about that before you purchase, because you may want to get the bigger set. And there are, I can show you really quickly, and the set of 12 colors, these are the ones that are facing this way. These are the colors I tend to use the most anyway. And I have doubles of some of these, so they really do get used. These would be the other colors in the set of 12. So they're useful, but definitely the ones I use the most are in the 12 set. So don't feel like you need to buy a big set if you're not sure about them. I think it's always better to be sure about the supplies you're getting. I'm going to use chocolate brown. And if you have the set of 24 and you want to use some different shades from that, that's totally fine too. And I'm putting the chocolate brown, and I'm coloring this using the side of the lead so that I'm getting almost like I'm using a pastel basically. And I'm throwing in these textured shadows under our little tufts of grass. Something that's also nice to do, it gives it a pretty look, is when you bring this shadow around the frame area, it almost adds like a vignette appearance. Kind of gives it a little like a double matte almost. You've got the white frame from our masking tape, but it gives it a little bit extra. And let's see, maybe I think we use this one. Do we use this yellow ochre? I know we used one that was, I'm not sure if we used the brown ochre or the yellow ochre. I think we used the brown ochre. We'll do a little yellow ochre in there too. Bring up more texture. And that's what's so great about mixed media, is that we get to use the best of both worlds. You know, we get to use detail from the pen. We get to use opaque color from the pencils. We get to fill a lot of area with our paint. So it's just really nice. If you felt like you wanted more in the water, but you didn't want to mess with it because you're like, oh, I kind of like it, but I also would like a little bit more dark, you can go in with the ink blue and add just little bits of darker color if you want to. You don't have to. Consider everything optional. If you're looking at your work and you're like, I actually really like it the way it is, don't feel like you need to do more. I'm also going to add some more grasses in here with the ink blue. It gives us a really nice depth, and when you lay this over the green, it just gives you like a darker green and a cooler green, and the cooler colors tend to add depth and shadow and push things back a little bit. So especially having those bluer grasses and these tufts of grass that are a little bit higher looks nice. You can do a little bit on that. I wouldn't do too much on these smaller ones. Okay. And there's also the green shadow you could add into the water if you wanted to, here and there. I don't think it really needs it, but again, if you feel like yours could use it, then go for it. I'm going to take the brown ochre and go in a few places and add those little wispy, kind of like, I don't know if you call them seeds, like wheat seeds, or I don't know, like little wheat fluffs, sea oats, whatever you want to call them. They will almost act like flowers in a composition like this, and it adds a little bit of variety, which I think is really, really pretty. Okay, and I think at this point I want to go in and add some pen. So I want to start off with the birds because I don't want to, I'm afraid I'll drag my hand through these if I go and do that after. So I'm going to start off with my 0.3 line maker. Make sure your paper's dry. We dried it with a tool, so it should be, but if you didn't use a tool, you might want to just wait a little bit. And I am just going to add very subtle details. Add a little bit of dark to the wing, add a little beak, maybe add a little line over the head, trace the top wing, and add a little bit of dark at the tip of the wing. I went up to Monhegan earlier this week with my daughter. She works out there, and we climbed up to these cliffs and we were painting the cliffs, and I was like, oh, I want some birds in here. And I could not remember what a seagull looked like to look at one from top down. So I had to wait for seagulls to fly by so I could actually see. So it's amazing what we start to observe once we start to paint things, you know? So you'll notice the more you paint, the more you observe, and the more things that you recognize. And if you start painting from life, you'll really notice your observation skills growing. Over here, we're going to darken up the tips of the wings. We're going to give this guy a little bit of a dark beak. Maybe just accent the bottom of the wings. Less is more because these lines are dark, so you don't want to do, You don't want to do too much. And so like for these bottom two, this one just a little touch at the tips of the wings where it's darker. The one that's a little bit closer, I did beak and tips of the wings. And so the bigger ones have more detail because they're closer to us. The smaller ones have less. And then I'm going to go into my water. I'm just going to throw in some little lines to indicate the motion. And if you don't like that, don't do it. I don't want you to do anything that you don't feel like will enhance your picture.
Lindsay,
Yes.
there's a couple questions about the pencils you are using. Can you let them know again what color pencils you are using?
Sure. These are the Derwent Drawing Pencils. They are available in 24 colors and they are all light fast and they're all muted tones. So they're great for wildlife, portraiture, and stuff like this where you want kind of a vintage flair to it. And the colors we used are available in the 12 color set, and the individual colors we used were yellow ochre. I think we will use white. I don't think I've actually used it yet. Chocolate, ink blue, green shadow. We will use black. We haven't used it yet. And brown ochre and olive earth. If you have other pencils handy and you don't have these, just grab what you have and just try to choose ones that are a little bit more muted to have a similar look to what we're doing here. And one thing I wanted to mention, because supplies get expensive and a supply can be perfectly good, but if it doesn't suit the way you work, then buying it would just be wasted money. So something that I really love about Derwent is that all their products are available open stock, which means maybe you like the idea of this, but you really wish you could pick your own colors and you would choose different colors. You can buy those pan paints open stock. You can buy Derwent blocks open stock if you prefer the block format. You can get any of their pens or pencils open stock. So if you're like, I don't know if I want the Derwent Light Fast or if I want the Derwent Drawing or if I want the Color Soft, you could buy a couple of each and then try them out before you invest in a whole set. Generally, your sets are the best bet or the best bang for your buck. But if you don't like something, buying a full set of it to find out you don't like it is kind of wasted money when there are so many varieties out there. Some people like harder pencils, some people like softer pencils, some people like bright colors, some people like earthy colors. It's much better to try a couple than to buy a full set and regret that you spent all your money on one set instead of trying a few things and getting exactly what suited you. I think I'm going to switch to my thicker line maker. This is the 0.08. Oh, and something else I want to mention, if you're working in a sketchbook and you've got real rough paper, I would recommend only using the 0.8. And instead of using it with a thickness, the full thickness of the pen, like we do when we hold it kind of straight up, if you work at a steep angle, you can kind of work on the edge of the nib, and that will give you a finer line on your thicker, on your rougher papers, and your markers will last a lot longer. Those thin nibs on rough watercolor paper will not last very long and will be frustrating to use. So if you're working in a sketchbook and you've got really rough paper, or you were working on a loose sheet of watercolor paper, you're definitely going to want to use a thicker nib. And if I'm getting real like aggressive with my techniques, this is a Strathmore greeting card. They are not super, they're textured, but they're not like really rough. They're not like a really rough paper. But still, if I'm going to get really expressive with my strokes here and really scribbly, and I love to do kind of expressive, sketchy strokes, I will go with a thicker pen because I know I'm not going to damage the pen and it's going to work a lot better, especially if I'm going over areas where I've put a lot of pencil. And these are available, like you get those two in the Derwent Line and Wash set. Oh my God, wait, I just got a little carried away there. I can go over it with colored pencil. You get those two in the Derwent Line and Wash, but they also have sets that have a variety of different nibs, or you can get them individually. So I know I use the 0.03 more than anything, so buying a set every time I used up a 0.03 would just be wasteful. So I like that I can just buy that one pen as I need it. You can kind of see what I was talking about on how when I said if I use the pens over colored pencil, it might skip a bit or beat up a bit. So where we put quite a bit of pencil on the grasses, I am getting that happening a little bit. And if you're noticing that too, it's not a flaw in the pen, it's just we're going over a waxy surface and it's going to want to do that. You can even see it here where I've added shadow. But I kind of like that because I can get these more broken shadows here that I like. But I also like a very sketchy look to my works, and we're all different. So if you don't like that, then you can do something differently. Now, if I have been going over anything weird, like if I've been going over color pencil, pastel, something that's maybe not factory recommended, what I do before I recap it is I take a paper towel, dry paper towel, make sure it's dry, and I just wipe off the tip. And that way, if there is anything residual on that nib, I'm removing it before it can dissolve and become part of the nib and then maybe seal it off or make it not perform very well. So that's another thing I would recommend. You can either scratch it off on a piece of scrap paper or just wipe it on a dry paper towel. But just remember, moisture is the enemy of your fine liners. You can get expressive without lining your sea oats or doing any of your grasses. And now I'm going to see if there's any other color I want. Now I think I want to go in with the black pencil. Now just keep in mind, this is going to be your darkest value. The black pencil and black pen are your darkest. So you might look at your piece and be like, I really like the value range that I have going here. I don't really need any more dark. Or you might look at, like, I'm looking at this patch right here and thinking, I would like it a little bit darker. It's a little too wimpy. So I can go in here. Whoops. These are a soft lead, so you don't want to press too hard. And I can add a little bit in and see if that's going to give me enough of what I want. But I use it sparingly because it can overwhelm a piece pretty easily. Now you can go in and add more watercolor on top. Or your water-based media on top, but just keep in mind that it will beat up a little bit on your pencil, and that's really the only thing to, I think, be concerned with. But I'm going to do that. I still feel like I want a little bit something more there, and I think what it was that I used was the natural brown and maybe a little bit of the Payne's gray, because it's not quite a black, but it is a nice dark value. And I think I'm gonna go in and throw a little bit in there. I don't want too much because I don't want to like cover up my pen work, but I do feel like I need a little bit of a darker value in there. So I'm just gonna dance a little bit of that in. But if you don't feel like you need that, then you certainly don't need to do it. It's just like cooking, right? You taste it. Oh, it needs a little more pepper. Oh, that's a little too acidic, or maybe it's a little too bitter, or it's a little too sweet, and you alter it a little bit until you get it just the way you want. If you want to do like a little blushy shadow, what you can do is kind of add a little bit of water in an area where you want the shadow. And look at that, I can go over this gently and not disturb what's underneath because of the ink tints. And then I can just dab in that color I want to blush out, and it will just go where it's wet and just kind of float out a little bit, which is kind of a pretty effect, I think. Maybe a little bit more of that bright blue in there. And at this point, we're just tweaking a little bit. We're not doing a lot. Now, I'm going to consider this pretty much done. I'm really happy with the way it looks, but it's hard to see exactly how it looks until you dry it and you've got everything all set. So I'm going to hit this real quick with my heat tool. And the other reason I like to dry it before I remove the tape is that the heat from a hair dryer or a heat tool will make the adhesive a little bit less grabby. First of all, if your paper's wet and you try to remove tape, it's going to rip. And then when you do heat it up to dry it, it loosens up the adhesive on the tape, making it easier to remove. So it's just kind of like an extra good thing to do before you take your tape up. And this is a heat tool. It's not a hair dryer, but a hair dryer will work absolutely fine. But don't dry your hair with a heat tool or you could really injure yourself because that does get much hotter than a hair dryer. It's like the heat with no air or very little air. But see how easy that comes off? And you can use the smaller pen to sign your name. And I love that, you know, I could paint this 5 times and everyone's going to be a little bit different depending on my mood for the day. And I guess whether I'm talking while I'm doing it or not. So there you can see our completed little paintings there. Now, if I hold it to the light, you can see little bits of shine if you've got some graphitin product on there, which can be kind of fun. If you don't like that look though, if you get some fixative, like some Krylon workable fixative, and you spray over that, that will totally make everything the same sheen, or like a matte finishing spray, or even a matte varnish. Just make sure it's compatible with the watercolor paper and watercolors in general. Krylon workable fixative is a pretty good one to use, and it's very affordable. So with that, I am going to go back to my original camera and thank everyone for joining us today. I hope that you had fun doing this project, and when you finish it, if you wouldn't mind, if you're going to post it online anyway, I would love it if you tagged me at Lindsay Wyrick on Instagram or Facebook so I can see it, because that's my favorite thing about these live classes is getting to see what you guys make. And also, I'm seeing, Laura, that looks great. I love that when I can see the artwork up there. I'm okay. You know what? I'm just going to scroll through. We got a couple minutes. I'm going to look through and see anybody who wants to hold their pictures up. Oh my goodness. Oh, those are looking good. Nice work, Anne. Let's see. Oh, Jill, great job. Jill did it. Looks like hers is larger. Oh, wow, Cindy, that looks awesome. Rihanna, good job. And if I, oh my gosh, I'm scrolling through and seeing rows of you. Karen, that looks awesome. Dee, good job. Skyvenger, I'm probably mispronouncing that, but that looks awesome. Good job, Joey. Good job, Sandy. Celia, awesome. Wow, you guys were painting up a storm, because it is hard to follow along for the first time you've painted one. Oh my gosh, everyone, wow. These are so good. Oh my gosh. Joanne, Catherine, Angela, wow. Oh my gosh. I wish I could see everything all at once so I don't miss anybody or see all of the on cameras together. Usha, that looks great. Oh, wow. These look so good. Natalie, Maxine, awesome. Oh, Joanne, that looks really good. Love your waves, Joanne. So good. Oh, Christina, look at that. Wow, I am so impressed. I am so impressed. Please tag me if you share these online, because even just seeing them in the tiny little squares, it's impressive. I want to see them. I want to zoom in. They look so good. And you can also tag Michael Stores and Derwent. So Derwent Art _US for the Derwent. Derwent has a couple accounts. I'm going to tag them all. I'm sure they all love to see it. And Michael Stores. Well, thank you all so much for sharing your artwork, for sharing your time with me, and for painting along. And if I didn't mention you by name, I was scrolling through pretty to try to see everything, and there wasn't a bad one in the bunch. They all look so good. On behalf of Michaels and Derwent, I'm Lindsay Wyrick. Thank you so much for joining us today. And as always, happy crafting and creating. Bye-bye.